The emergency beacon. The silence of space was deafening, broken only by the steady hum of the Exodus's engines. Captain Amelia Ross stood alone on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the swirling darkness outside the window. The stars looked so distant, like pinpricks in a vast, unfeeling void. In this cold, endless expanse, the Exodus was a speck, a lone defender in a battle far larger than any one human could comprehend. Then the signal came. A burst of static erupted from the comms console, followed by the familiar pulse of an emergency beacon. The signal was unmistakable. High frequency, quantum signature, a distress call. It rippled through the void, as if pleading for salvation. Amelia's fingers hovered over the controls, the harsh red light of the beacon flashing on the screen. Her eyes narrowed. "What's the source?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. "Originating from Sierra 9, replied Commander Xavier Blake, his voice tinged with concern. "It's a mining colony. Their systems are going offline. They've activated the emergency beacon." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. Sierra 9 was one of the furthest human outposts, a colony primarily used for mining rare resources in the asteroid belt. It was a quiet place, isolated, and far from the more populated human worlds. She had never expected to hear from Sierra 9, especially not under these circumstances. "Can we establish direct communication with them?" she asked. Blake's fingers danced over the control panel, but after a moment, he shook his head. "Negative, Captain. The signal's too weak. It's possible their comms are damaged. We'll have to rely on the beacon's coordinates to find them." Amelia didn't need to hear more. The tone of the beacon was urgent, its frequency erratic, as if its sender was barely holding on. She turned toward the holo map of the system, eyes scanning the trajectory of the distress signal. The colony's location was dangerously close to Nexus territory. The Nexus Swarm. The name alone sent a chill down Amelia's spine. The Nexus were a biomechanical race that had been terrorizing human colonies for decades. They were relentless, unstoppable, their warships like dark, chitinous giants that seemed to suck the light out of space as they advanced. They were not a race of mere conquerors, but of assimilators, stripping entire planets of their resources, and worse yet, their people, adding them to their ever-growing swarm of drones. Their technology was organic, their weapons adaptive. It was a nightmare to fight against, one that humanity had barely survived each time it encountered them. But Sierra 9 was not a military outpost. The colony had no fleet, no defensive capabilities beyond its rudimentary planetary shields. If the Nexus were closing in, there was only one possible outcome: total annihilation. "Set course for Sierra 9, Amelia ordered, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Time's not on our side." As the Exodus accelerated into the Fold space corridor, Amelia felt the weight of the decision press on her chest. This mission was more than just a rescue operation. It was a race against time. The Nexus could arrive at any moment. They were known to overwhelm even the most advanced human fleets, and Sierra 9 was nothing more than an undefended target. The ship lurched forward as the Fold space drive activated, sending them rocketing toward the colony at faster-than-light speeds. Amelia sat back in her chair, trying to steady her breathing. This was no ordinary mission. They weren't just responding to a distress signal. They were about to face a force that had the power to wipe out everything in its path. And they were doing it with a ship that had never been tested in battle. Her thoughts were interrupted by Blake's voice, calm but edged with urgency. "Captain, we've got a new reading." Amelia's attention snapped back to the console. Blake was studying a series of holographic displays. The readings were inconsistent, erratic. "It's the Nexus fleet," Blake said, his voice a little tighter now. "Their ships are appearing on the radar. They're entering the system ahead of us." Amelia's pulse quickened. She stepped toward the tactical station, watching as the holographic display filled with the silhouettes of alien vessels. The Nexus ships, dark and segmented like enormous insects, loomed larger and larger on the screen. Each one was capable of deploying thousands of drones, each drone a mindless tool of destruction, capable of tearing through human fleets with ease. "How long until they reach Syrah 9? Amelia asked, her voice steady but carrying a hint of steel. Blake paused, his fingers flying across the terminal. "They're moving fast, Captain. With their fold space technology, they'll be there in less than 36 hours. We won't be able to reach the colony in time unless we take a more direct route." Amelia's mind raced. She had no doubt that the Exodus was one of the most advanced warships humanity had ever built. Its design was a fusion of cutting-edge human engineering and alien technology salvaged from previous encounters. But it was still experimental, unproven in the heat of real combat. "Prepare the crew for battle," she said. "We'll need to engage their fleet head-on if we're going to stop them. This isn't just about saving the colony. It's about holding them off long enough to give humanity a chance to fight back." Blake gave a nod of agreement. "Understood, Captain." As Amelia watched the Nexus fleet advance, her thoughts were filled with one question. Could human ingenuity, courage, and resilience be enough to face this existential threat? She knew what was at stake. If the Nexus succeeded here, Syrah 9 would fall. But more than that, their victory would pave the way for the Nexus to push deeper into human space. This wasn't just a battle for Syrah 9. It was a battle for humanity's future. The call for help. The fold space jump felt like a violent lurch through an unseen void, a sudden pull at the very fabric of reality that left the crew momentarily disoriented. Captain Amelia Ross, eyes glued to the holographic projection in front of her, steadied herself in the command chair. The map of Syrah 9 and its surrounding system flickered into focus, the trajectory of the Nexus fleet growing ever closer. She could already feel the pressure mounting, as if the weight of humanity's survival was bearing down on her shoulders. Initiating deceleration, Commander Blake's voice broke through the tension. "We'll be in orbit within 10 minutes. The Exodus shuddered as it dropped out of fold space, and the cold, distant glow of Syrah 9 appeared on the view screens. A planet of sharp, jagged mountains, dust storms, and sprawling mining facilities. It looked peaceful from the distance, too peaceful for what was coming. A storm was on the horizon, and it was no natural one. "Status on the colony's defenses?" Amelia asked, her eyes never leaving the planet. Blake's fingers worked rapidly across his console. "Planetary shields are holding for now, but they're under extreme strain. The Nexus is adapting their weapons to pierce through standard human defense measures. If they're not reinforced soon, it won't last." Amelia bit her lip, considering the possibilities. The Exodus was designed to be a shield and sword in one, capable of deploying both offensive and defensive capabilities. But Syrah 9's planetary shields were nowhere near as advanced as their ships. And the Nexus, well, the Nexus were different. More than just an enemy, they were a force of nature, evolving in real time, learning as they attacked. Every attack they made wasn't just a strike. It was data gathered, a step toward their inevitable victory. Suddenly, the ship's comms crackled to life, and the unmistakable voice of Governor Ilara Kairos came through, clear but strained. "Captain Ross, you've made it. Just in time." The governor's voice was a blend of gratitude and desperation, heavy with the burden of responsibility. "The Nexus are already here. They've breached our outer defense perimeter. We've mobilized what we can, but our resources are exhausted. We need your help. Please." Amelia's heart sank as she heard the raw fear in the governor's voice. She had known the Nexus were coming, but hearing the human toll of their relentless advance made the threat all the more real. She glanced at Blake, who gave a subtle nod, confirming their path. "We're in orbit now, Governor. We'll assist with reinforcing the shields, but we're going to need full access to the planet's communication grid and control systems. Can you open the comm link?" There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of frantic typing and clicking. "Opening access now. But Captain, I need to warn you. Our ground forces are ill-equipped to deal with what's coming. The Nexus don't just destroy, they assimilate. Our only hope is to hold them off until we can evacuate the civilians. Amelia stood up from her chair, her gaze hardening. I understand. But you won't be evacuating anyone if the Nexus breach your atmosphere. Our mission is to stop them here, to save Sci-Fi. We'll deal with the evacuation when that's done. She knew the words were bold, but she had no choice. Her mind raced through the possibilities, analyzing the situation. The Exodus was one of humanity's most advanced ships, but in the face of the Nexus swarm, nothing was certain. The comm screen blinked again as Governor Kairos's face appeared on the holoprojector. The lines on her face were deeper than when they'd last spoken, and her eyes betrayed the sleepless nights she'd endured trying to prepare for the worst. She nodded grimly. Understood, Captain. But please, if you can't stop them, we're all dead. Everyone on this planet. Amelia's throat tightened as she looked back toward the approaching Nexus fleet. We won't let that happen. The Exodus had reached the outskirts of Sci-Fi's atmosphere, but the situation was far from ideal. The Nexus fleet, now visible in the distance like dark, organic shadows against the pale blue of the planet, had already begun to launch their assault. The ship's biomorphic forms glistened in the vacuum, their armor-like exoskeletons shifting and pulsating, as if the vessels themselves were alive. Blake's voice cut through the tension. Captain, the Nexus are deploying drones. They're preparing for ground assaults. Drones of all sizes, from small scouts to massive war machines. They're using gravity wells to pull themselves into the atmosphere. How long until they breach the planetary shields? Amelia asked, her voice still firm, though the edge of urgency began to slip into her tone. Blake checked the readout. Minutes, maybe seconds. The planetary shields can't hold out forever against that kind of firepower. Deploy our strike teams, Amelia ordered without hesitation. We'll delay their ground assault as long as we can, but we need those shields reinforced. We can't afford to let them slip. She knew she had no time to waste. Every second was one closer to Sci-Fi's fall. On the surface of Sci-Fi, Governor Kairos watched as the first wave of Nexus drones entered the atmosphere. The colony's surface defense weapons fired into the air, but their lasers were swallowed by the alien ship's shifting shields, reflecting harmlessly away. The Nexus had long perfected the art of defense, and it showed in every attack. Their weapons adapted with every strike, outmatching even the most advanced human tech in ways that defied comprehension. All units, deploy. Governor Kairos barked, though she knew it was a futile gesture. Sci-Fi's defenders were brave, but the Nexus had an army of countless drones at their command, all linked in a hive mind network, a force that could adapt to any human strategy. As the sky above Sci-Fi darkened, the ground forces began their evacuation procedures. It was chaos, with civilians running toward the underground shelters, trying to escape the oncoming storm. But the soldiers knew they were running out of time, and the Nexus had already begun their descent. Back in space, Amelia's gaze never wavered from the scene before her. The Exodus was locked into a tense orbit above Sci-Fi, its weapons primed and ready for the imminent battle. A series of transmissions came in from her ground units as they began their descent to the planet's surface. Captain, we've located their main command ship. It's in a low orbit above the colony. If we can disable it, the rest of their swarm might lose cohesion, Blake said, his voice calm but with an edge of determination. Amelia nodded sharply. That's our target. Take it down, Blake. The fate of Sci-Fi depends on it. With a deep breath, Captain Ross watched as the Exodus prepared to launch its first strike at the heart of the Nexus swarm. The last stand. The cold expanse of space seemed eerily still as the Exodus sailed through the void, its engines humming with quiet urgency. Inside the command deck, the air was thick with tension. The crew, battle-hardened and ready, were mere seconds away from engaging the Nexus in what could be the most critical mission of their lives. Amelia Ross stood at the front of the command center, her hands gripping the sides of the console, eyes narrowed in determination. Status report, she called out, her voice cutting through the air, firm and controlled. Blake, ever the composed commander, didn't hesitate. "All systems are ready, Captain. Strike teams are en route to the surface. The first wave of drones has entered the atmosphere, but we're not out of options yet. We still have time to disable their command ship." Time. Amelia muttered under her breath. Time was something they didn't have much of. The Nexus was an enemy unlike any they'd faced before, a collective of advanced biological warfare and artificial intelligence. Every drone, every ship, every move they made was a calculated part of their grand strategy, an ever-adapting enemy that outpaced human ingenuity. "Captain, we're picking up additional Nexus signatures on long-range scanners," Lieutenant Garvey announced, her fingers flying over her console. "There's a massive fleet on approach. It looks like they're sending reinforcements from deep within the system. We're not just dealing with a few waves anymore. This is a full-scale invasion." The words landed like a blow, a punch to the gut of Amelia's resolve. The first wave had been bad enough, but a full invasion. She could feel the weight of Sira-9's fate pressing on her chest, suffocating her. "We need to hit the command ship now," Amelia said, the urgency in her voice impossible to ignore. "Full power to all weapons. Deploy the fighter squadron immediately. We need to make them bleed before they can reinforce." Blake's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, they shared an unspoken understanding. This was it. This was the make-or-break moment. Either they would stop the Nexus here and now, or Sira-9 would fall. On the planet's surface, the situation was growing dire. Governor Ilara Kairos stood in the command center of Sira-9's Central Operations Hub, her face bathed in the harsh glow of blinking red warning lights. She watched as the city's outer defenses crumbled under the sheer force of the Nexus assault. She could hear the sounds of distant explosions, feel the tremors in the ground as drones rained down from the sky. "We've lost the western perimeter," Colonel Mendez, the head of Sira-9's military division, reported grimly. "The Nexus drones are moving too fast. The shield generators are already compromised." Kairos clenched her fists. She knew that once the Nexus breached their outer defenses, there would be no stopping them. The assimilation process would begin, and the entire planet would be consumed. Every moment that passed, another part of Sira-9's defenses fell away. Another city block lost. "Governor, we need to get the civilians underground," Mendez urged, his voice strained. "The Nexus will overwhelm us if we don't move them fast." Kairos nodded, her mind racing. The underground shelters were their last line of defense, but even then, there was no guarantee they'd be safe. The Nexus had the technology to adapt, to break through anything humanity could throw at them. "Send all available forces to the shelters. Evacuate the civilians. I'll stay with the command team. We can still coordinate the defense from here," she said, her voice betraying none of the fear she felt inside. Her words were resolute, but she couldn't escape the dread gnawing at the edges of her mind. What if it wasn't enough? What if the Exodus didn't make it in time? Back in orbit, the Exodus was preparing for its first strike. Captain Ross's eyes never left the holographic map of Sira-9, the target pinpointed as the Nexus command ship. If they could disable it, they could at least throw the Nexus off balance. The ships and drones would lose coordination, and the human forces on the ground might have a fighting chance. But if they failed... "Captain, the fighter squadron is in position," Blake reported, his voice steady despite the mounting tension. "We've already plotted the best attack vector. We can hit the Nexus command ship at the weak point of its shield array." "Launch fighters," Amelia ordered without hesitation. "I want full assault mode. Take out those shields and keep them distracted. We'll go in from the rear and hit their core systems." As the fighters blasted off from the Exodus's hangar base, Amelia watched the display with a mixture of dread and hope. Each fighter was piloted by her best, veterans of countless battles, willing to fight to the last breath. The small, agile ships tore through the blackness of space, weaving and dodging incoming fire from the Nexus drones. "Captain," Lieutenant Garvey spoke up, her voice laced with anxiety. We've detected an anomaly in the Nexus fleet. They're adapting faster than we thought. Their shields are already evolving to counteract our fighters' attacks. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. What does that mean? It means, Garvey said, her voice tight, that the longer we take, the stronger their defenses will become. We need to hit them hard now, or it'll be too late. Without thinking, Amelia's hand slammed down on the command console. Then we hit them with everything we've got. All weapons, fire. The Exodus unleashed its full arsenal in a devastating barrage, lasers and plasma bolts cutting through the silence of space, striking at the Nexus fleet. The fighter squadron circled like a pack of wolves, striking from different angles to confuse the enemy, buying precious seconds for the Exodus to get into position. The Nexus responded with cold precision, their ships shifting seamlessly into defensive positions, deflecting the incoming attacks with near-perfect timing. But there was no time for hesitation. The Exodus was locked into the fight of its life. On the surface, the fight had already begun in earnest. Nexus drones, dark and ominous, poured through the skies like a plague. Their mechanical forms were sleek and terrifying, with no discernible faces or features, just cold, calculating machines with one purpose: to conquer, to assimilate, to erase humanity from the planet. Colonel Mendez watched as his troops fired into the air, their plasma rounds streaking toward the incoming drones. But it was futile. The drones were too fast, too advanced. They dodged and weaved, their reflective surfaces rendering most of the human weapons ineffective. "This isn't going to hold," Mendez muttered under his breath. "We need backup." Governor Kairos, hearing the desperation in his voice, stepped forward. "We can't afford to wait. I've ordered all remaining forces to the underground shelters. The civilians must survive. If we don't hold them back here, it's over for everyone." Mendez nodded, but there was no mistaking the resignation in his eyes. The human forces were fighting valiantly, but they were outmatched. Above, the battle raged on as the Exodus and the fighter squadron engaged the Nexus fleet. Each strike, each move was a gamble, every second pushing them closer to victory or annihilation. But deep within Amelia's heart, one thought consumed her: they had to win. For Sci-Fi. For humanity. The edge of desperation. The Exodus streaked through the void, its hull groaning under the strain of battle as it continued its desperate engagement with the Nexus forces. Captain Amelia Ross gripped the edge of the command chair, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed on the holographic display as explosions erupted across the stars. "Shields are holding, but not for much longer." Lieutenant Garvey's voice echoed over the comms, her tone taut with urgency. "The Nexus fleet is evolving faster than we can react. Their ships are adjusting to our fire patterns, anticipating our every move. Keep them off us for as long as you can," Amelia commanded, her voice sharp but weary. "I want that command ship disabled. All fire on its power core. We hit that, we cripple their entire fleet." The tension in the command center was palpable as the Exodus bucked beneath them, taking hits from the Nexus vessels. On the monitors, the vast fleet of the Nexus adapted in real time, their shields flickering with unsettling precision. The Exodus's lasers and missiles found their marks, but the Nexus were no longer caught off guard. Their defensive measures were evolving faster than any human-made technology could handle. "Blake, do you have an angle?" Amelia called to her second-in-command, Commander Blake Griffin, who stood beside the weapons console, his eyes scanning the tactical readouts with a focus that was almost otherworldly. Blake's voice was low but resolute. "I've got a shot, Captain. But it's tight. If we don't land this one, we're going to lose the window for good." Amelia's pulse quickened. The next move could be their last, but it was a risk they had no choice but to take. "Do it," she ordered. On the planet's surface, the battle was already a hellscape. The Nexus drones, relentless and terrifying, swarmed through the cityscapes of Sci-Fi, their mechanical limbs cutting down any resistance in their path. The streets, once vibrant and full of life, now lay in ruins, Explosions erupted across the skyline, sending plumes of smoke and fire into the atmosphere. Governor Ilara Kairos paced nervously in the command center, her mind swirling with 100 impossible decisions. Her people were dying by the second, the outer cities falling under the unstoppable march of the Nexus. She could hear the distant roar of military air support, Sierra 9's final hope, but even that was fading as the Nexus adapted their tactics. "They're too many," Colonel Mendez muttered, his voice strained with exhaustion. "We can't hold them back much longer. The drones are already in the main city grid. We need to evacuate everyone to the lower bunkers. Now." Kairos's heart pounded. Her mind screamed at her to make the right choice, to find some way out of this. But every option she considered felt like a death sentence. "We don't have enough time for a full evacuation," she said, her voice hollow. "The Nexus will overrun us long before we can get everyone underground. We have to make a stand here, hold them off just long enough for the Exodus to disable their command ship. If they can take out the fleet, we have a chance." Mendez's face was grim, but there was a flicker of reluctant understanding in his eyes. "Understood, Governor, but I need reinforcements. We can't stop them with what we have left." "Then we'll do it with what we've got," Kairos replied, her voice stronger now, steeling herself for the inevitable. "You, me, and every soldier still able to fight. We'll hold this line until the Exodus gets through." Above the planet, the Exodus's weapon systems screamed as the massive ship unleashed a torrent of fire upon the Nexus fleet. The ship's hull shuddered from the incoming blasts, and Amelia knew they were running out of time. The Nexus were getting smarter, anticipating their movements, adapting their shields to counter every strategy the Exodus had thrown at them. Every strike felt like it would be their last. "Captain," Garvey shouted, eyes wide with shock as the radar blipped with alarming frequency. "There's something coming out of their command ship. It's huge." Amelia's heart skipped a beat as she studied the new data on the screen. From the Nexus flagship, a new ship emerged, larger, more deadly than anything the Exodus had encountered. It was a massive warship, unlike anything they'd seen before, and it was heading straight for them. "Blake, we need to take that thing out before it reaches us," Amelia barked. "Get me a clear shot." "Already working on it," Blake replied, his hands flying over the control panel. "I'll line up a targeting vector, but we have to get through their shields first." Amelia's mind raced as the ship surged forward. This new threat had the potential to end everything. The Exodus wouldn't survive another direct hit. But Blake was right. If they didn't disable the Nexus flagship, the entire battle would be lost. On the ground, the situation was spiraling out of control. Colonel Mendez's team fought valiantly, but the drones were simply too overwhelming. No matter how many they destroyed, there were always more to take their place. The streets of the capital were now a battlefield, fires burning in every direction, the air thick with the acrid stench of smoke and ozone. Ilara Kairos stood among her people, watching as the last of the military forces fell back toward the underground bunkers. The civilians were safe, for now, but her thoughts were with the men and women still fighting above ground. The sacrifices they had made to buy time were unimaginable, but still, it felt like it wasn't enough. She had no illusions anymore. The Exodus had to succeed. Without that, all hope was lost. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet rumbled violently, and a deep growl reverberated through the air. She looked up to see a towering Nexus war machine descending from the sky. It was massive, its mechanical limbs and armored plating like something from a nightmare. This wasn't just a drone. This was something far worse, a weapon of mass destruction. The ground trembled beneath its weight, and its weapon systems powered up with an ominous hum. "Everyone, take cover," Mendez shouted, already leading the charge toward the nearest fortifications. But there was no cover from this thing, no place to hide. Kairos's heart pounded in her chest. She was running out of options. The Nexus had evolved into something beyond anything they could fight. Then, as if by miracle, a massive blast of energy tore through the sky, striking the Nexus war machine with deadly accuracy. The beast staggered, its legs buckling under the sheer force of the blow. The blast came from above, from the Exodus. Amelia Ross and her crew had arrived, and they were not backing down. "Colonel," Kairos shouted, her voice filled with renewed hope. "We have a chance. Push forward. We're not done yet." Mendez nodded, a fire igniting in his eyes. "We fight, then, for Sci-Fi. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Kairos felt the weight of hope stirring in her chest. The Exodus had bought them a reprieve, but it was a fragile one. It was up to them now, to hold the line, to defend their world, and to ensure that the sacrifices made would not be in vain. The final gambit. The Exodus rocketed through the void, its hull shuddering under the brutal barrage from the Nexus fleet, the massive warship looming in front of them. An unrelenting behemoth, was unlike anything the crew had faced. Its energy shields glowed with an eerie blue light, bending and refracting the Exodus's laser fire like it was nothing. Yet, with each pulse of the weaponry, Amelia Ross felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Shields at 30%, Captain." Garvey's voice was frantic, laced with an edge of fear that she couldn't hide. "We can't take much more. If we don't find a way to breach that command ship's shields." "Don't say it," Amelia interrupted, her voice sharp but controlled. "We're not done yet." She slammed her fist onto the armrest of her command chair, eyes locked on the tactical screen. The Nexus flagship loomed larger and larger, a dark cloud in the vastness of space, but Amelia refused to give in to the crushing weight of inevitability. She had been in worse situations before, much worse, and survived. This time, they would survive too. "Blake," Amelia called, turning to her second-in-command. "You know what to do. We need to hit that ship's command core. If we don't, Sci-Fi is done for. There's no going back from this." Blake Griffin nodded, his expression grim but resolute. He didn't need to say anything. His silence was enough. He had been preparing for this moment since the first blast fired, every action building toward the single shot that could make all the difference. But as the Exodus approached, the Nexus flagship's weapons fired in unison. Explosions rocked the ship, throwing everyone to the side. The hull cracked under the assault, metal screeching in protest as the massive warship's firepower found their mark. "All hands brace for impact," Garvey shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We've lost power to aft thrusters. Captain, we're dead in the water if we don't get moving." Amelia's heart raced. There was no time to waste. If the Exodus was left floating helplessly in the line of fire, the entire mission would be over. "Full power to forward thrusters," she ordered. "Blake, take the shot. Now." Blake didn't hesitate. His hands danced across the control panel, fingers moving with the precision of a machine as he adjusted the ship's trajectory. The targeting system locked onto the Nexus flagship's command core, a vulnerable point despite its heavy armor. But the shields were the real issue. The massive, pulsating blue field that had absorbed everything they threw at it. Powering up the ion disruptor, Blake muttered, his brow furrowing in concentration. "If this doesn't work, nothing will." The seconds dragged by like hours as the Exodus moved into position. Time slowed to a crawl in Amelia's mind. Her fingers dug into the armrests of her chair as she watched the energy build up in the ion disruptor. "Captain," Garvey shouted from the communication station. "The Nexus flagship is locking onto our position. They're preparing a direct hit. Brace for impact." Amelia shouted back, but her voice was drowned out by the massive shockwave that hit the Exodus. The entire ship jolted as if struck by a meteor, and alarms blared in every corridor. The deck beneath Amelia's feet shook violently, throwing her forward out of her seat. She hit the floor hard, pain shooting up her arm. But she didn't care. She forced herself to her feet, ignoring the blackness creeping in at the edges of her vision. "Blake," she rasped, coughing from the dust in the air. "Do it. Now." A blinding flash filled the command deck as Blake hit the final key. The ion disruptor fired with a force that shook the ship to its very core. The pulse of energy shot forward, slamming into the Nexus flagship's shield like a battering ram, the blue field flickering violently under the onslaught. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed like the shields would hold, but then they began to crack, fractures spreading across the shield like glass breaking under pressure. The ship's hull groaned as the energy blast pummeled the command core. And then, the impossible happened. The shield gave way. The Exodus shuddered from the impact as the ion disruptor tore through the heart of the Nexus flagship. There was a flash of white light. And then, nothing. For a brief, fleeting moment, the stars seemed to blink out of existence. Then, an explosion ripped through the vastness of space. On the surface of Sci-Fi, Governor Ilara Kairos could only watch helplessly as the battle raged on. Her soldiers fought with all the fury they had left, but there was nothing they could do against the onslaught of Nexus forces. Buildings crumbled, streets were torn apart, and the cries of the wounded filled the air. Her heart was heavy with the knowledge that her people were losing the fight, and that the destruction of the Nexus fleet was their only hope. Then, a distant rumble shook the ground beneath her feet, and a strange, unfamiliar silence followed. For a moment, Ilara could hear nothing but the crackle of distant fires. It felt wrong, unnatural. Then the sky erupted. A massive burst of energy flooded the heavens, brighter than the sun itself. It was like the very fabric of space had torn open, a shockwave that rattled her bones. The ground shook, and the Nexus drones froze for an instant, as if in shock. Ilara's breath caught in her throat as she watched the sky above her, where the battle was being fought. The explosion was not just a fireball. It was a moment of finality, a signal of victory, a turning point. The Nexus flagship had been destroyed. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned. The Nexus fleet, in disarray after the loss of their command ship, began to scatter, their once coordinated assaults turning into panicked retreats. The Exodus had made the impossible shot, and now the Nexus forces were starting to break apart. Ilara stood tall, her jaw set in determination, as she turned to her troops. "It's not over yet," she said, her voice fierce. "Push forward. The Exodus has given us the opening we needed. This is our chance to win." Her soldiers, battered but not broken, rallied around her. The people of Sci-Fi had fought for their survival, but now they would fight for their freedom. Back in the depths of space, Amelia watched the display, her breath catching in her throat as the Nexus flagship crumbled into a ball of fire and debris. The battle was still ongoing, but it was clear their strike had been successful. "Captain, we did it," Blake whispered, awe in his voice. "The flagship is down." But Amelia wasn't ready to celebrate. She had learned never to count on victory until the final blow was struck. She knew the Nexus wouldn't give up that easily. There would be retaliation, and it would come fast. "We hold the line," she said, voice steady but with a burning edge of resolve. "We've bought Sci-Fi a moment. Now we need to finish this."